So for the right side, we are going to have to pull off our exhaust. So we'll take our spring puller, pull off the bottom spring from the Graves can. We're also going to grab some gloves to take this off so we don't get any fingerprint oils on the titanium. Alright. So first we're going to take off the exhaust bracket mount for the stock, which is, let's see, a 5mm right here. And then I think a 3 or a 4 right here. That's a 4. And we are going to be reusing this piece right here with the Vortex bracket, so just keep that to the side. Now this side's a little bit more complicated because of the master cylinder for the rear. So we're going to take the cotter pin and spin it around while it's still attached, and we're going to loosen it or untie it, whatever you want to say. There we go. Now save this cotter pin. I think we need to use it with the Vortex. It's going to be a little metal washer here. This pin will push through. We can pull it out from the other side. So I was hoping we would, but I think we need to loosen up the master to give us some room, and then this guy should just slide right out. So we're going to take 2 4mm Allens, loosen up the rear master cylinder. Yep. Now I want to do this all before doing the main mounts for the master. I think it will be easier. Now this bottom pin, like I said, just slid right out. So we can put that aside with the cotter pin and that washer. So this is now free. So this whole section should just hang here. So now we can start removing the actual rear set right now. So now these are the 2 6mm bolts that we have to remove. It's really shocking how light they keep these on. Put this guy down. Okay, so we're actually just going to use the spring puller. Pull off the spring right down here just for the brake. Now that guy is loose. And then there is a small Allen bolt right here that we're also going to undo. Don't know if you can see that, but this is a 4mm. There is a washer on top right here. And now this should be an entire bracket for your brake that we're going to be removing. So there's the back end of your stock rear set. Nothing too exciting, but we are ready for the new one. So the stock brake light connector was actually just being pulled by a string. You can see that little metal bar, and it has 2 electrical connectors right at the top. So what Vortex provides, if you want, if you're only using this for track, you don't need to install them, but it's actually a brand new Banjo bolt, which this collar will go around, and then when it receives brake pressure, it's actually going to send a signal through these 2 electrical cables back into this line, and then you'll get your brake light. So this is an optional piece, it doesn't come with it, but like I usually ride my bike on the street as well as the track, so this is definitely something I wanted. So we're gonna have to splice this into this, and then replace this Banjo bolt with this collar and these 2 new crush washers right here. So we're gonna start by cutting the wires. Actually, we're gonna cut this guard as well. Now that we have these two cables exposed, just gonna cut them off of this harness right at the ends. So now this guy can go in the trash, and now we have the two leads to the brake light connector right there. We are going to disconnect the Banjo bolt. Oh wow, that guy's on there. Yep. We might have to mount the rear sets just to get this guy off. Well, now that we have the rear sets mounted, we might as well just do a quick bleed of the system to get the brake fluid out so it doesn't splash everywhere when we disconnect the top Banjo bolt. So I'm just going to put this bolt in real quick. Alright, so since we did remount the rear sets so we could undo the Banjo bolt, we're actually just going to bleed the system as well. I do have the speed bleeders on, so if you haven't worked with these, they are amazing. I'll leave a link in the description below. Basically, when you open them up, you can just keep pumping away at the pedal and you won't get any air back into your line. So, great piece of kit. Highly recommend them. Now we gotta mount the master real quick. Alright, so now that we have the master mounted again to the rear set, just so we can do a quick bleed, we have our bleed valve loose. We do have a speed bleeder in here, so if you haven't used these before, these are a great option. You can pretty much bleed your brakes without ever getting air back into your system. So I cracked this loose. This is just going into our bottle right here. So now I'm going to start pumping away at the brakes and getting rid of all the fluid. So now that we did a good bleed on the system, we should be able to pop off this Banjo bolt on the brake line. It's on there pretty tight. There we go. Now that this is loosened, I am going to loosen the rear sets and also the master cylinder to hang it over a plastic tub just in case we get any excess brake fluid. This guy out. This guy out. Now this last one out. Alright, so we're going to hang it over plastic tub below just in case. Don't want to get it on your exhaust, fairing, swing arm, anything like that. Alright, so it looks like it wants to hang right there. We're going to take this bolt out. There's going to be two sets of washers. So one's already at the top. The other fell into the tray. So as I mentioned before, this collar is going to go over this new Banjo bolt, and these wires we're going to splice into the stock harness, which is just tucked away back here. But I'm going to let this drain and drip for a little bit. Alright, so now we're going to take the Banjo bolt for the brake light connector, and we're going to place a washer underneath this coupler or the brake line, and then a washer above. Put the Banjo bolt through. Then we're going to screw it in by hand to the master cylinder. Let the electrical just twist around. So we'll tighten that later on, but I just wanted to get the Banjo bolt installed so we have an idea of how much wire we need to cut to connect to the brake stock brake line harness, which is right here. So with judging the brake line switch from Vortex, I can already tell we're definitely too long, so I'm going to cut it probably about halfway. Vortex is saying that the polarity does not matter, which is nice, so we don't have to match up red and blue or black and brown, so we can just literally plug and play and the polarity does not matter. So just going to take a X-Acto knife, just open up these cables real quick. So just cutting off the excess with my scissors. And there we go. So we have 2 of the wires exposed from the Vortex brake switch. Now there is one other video about doing this install, but because it was a track ready bike, they didn't include the brake switch. So hope this helps out, and glad to be showing it to you guys. So now I'm taking the Vortex brake switch, and here's the stock brake signal connector. So I'm just running it back up just to see where I want to cut into the stock connector, and then I'm going to pull this out through the top, and then we're going to start making our cuts. So interestingly enough, on the stock connector it does have these kind of flanged edges right here. Not sure if you can see that with the light. So we're going to be cutting right here and stripping back the cabling probably about to here, and then this is going to pretty much line up very well. We're going to heat shrink it and use bullet connectors. So there's our cut. We're going to use our X-Acto knife once again, but we got through one layer. Now we're going to have to get through the second. Alright, so just as before, we're going to use our scissors, cut away this excess cable sealant covers, whatever you want to call them. Like I said, in the end we're going to use shrink wrap, so everything will be weather safe, just in case it were to rain when you're on a ride. Alright, so now we have stock connectors here and the Vortex connectors right here. So it looks like these wires are about a 20 gauge. The wires on the driven look like they're about maybe a 22 gauge. So we're just going to strip these. So I like to use bullet connectors just in case for any reason I do need to take them off. So for these, we simply slide it through. Make sure that the connection is getting inside of the joint. Seems like it is. And then we're going to crimp right in the middle. So this joint is now connected. We're also going to crimp a little bit closer to the actual coupler or the connector, just to make sure that it's snug. So there's one side. Now we do the other. So once again, we slide it on. Make sure that everything is connecting. Then we're going to crimp right in the middle. Crimp closer to the connector joint a little bit, and then a little bit at the end just to make sure it doesn't come loose. So I use females when it's connected to the stock harness, and then males from here or anything else that I'm plugging into, just in case I want to pull them out for any reason. So there we go. Now for the male end, these are usually like 22 gauge, 24 gauge sometimes, so Usually when I strip these, I like to fold them over on itself just to give it some more width when I put the connectors on. So we're going to leave us plenty of space here. And then, like I said, for these guys, I'm just going to fold them over and do a little bit of a twist. And remember, all this is doing is just increasing the diameter so that when we put the male bullet connectors in, it's going to create a good bite for these. So here is the two male connectors. So pretty much the same process as we did earlier. Just going to take the male connector, slide on the bullet connector, make sure that everything is getting in there. Sometimes I like to see a little bit of the copper or the wire running, coming out from this side. There's a little bit of an opening. And then just like before, just going to crimp it down. So crimp in the rear, crimp in the front. And this guy is not going anywhere. So now let's do this other lead. And that is the easiest way to connect any electrical on your bike. So we're going to run this back. We're also going to put heat shrinking wrap around the connection, but really these are just plug and play now that we have the connectors on. So we'll just plug them in and then heat shrink some wrap around it. Alright, so now that we have the Vortex Banjo bolt installed, we reconnected the bullet connectors for the stock brake light switch, electrical taped them up, and now we can finally tuck them away back behind the cylinder and the brake reservoir. So now we're just going to screw this guy back in. Alright, so now that this is completed, we're going to torque this down just a little bit. Doesn't need to be crazy high amount of torque, but we do want to make sure that this gets a good crush seal with the Banjo bolt. But in terms of the wiring, it's just like it was from the factory, tucked away, nice and clean. I might zip tie the connector maybe to this brake line just so it's a little bit more hidden. But other than that, I don't mind it. Doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary, and it looks good. Actually, even right there, just tucked behind the bracket, I think that looks nice right there too. To install the rear set right here, we are going to use some Loctite on the big 6mm Allen bolts. Put some in here. So we're pretty much going to push the master out of the way just to get this fitted. So now that we have the master cylinder mounted, we can put that little bit of pressure to tighten down the brake line on that Banjo bolt. Once again, you remember you are screwing into aluminum, so it doesn't need to be crazy tight. But get a good amount of torque just to make sure that those crush washers are doing their job. And that should be good. So we tightened the master cylinder mounts just so we could get some tension on the Banjo bolt to tighten it. But the rear sets for the rear actually mount right over those holes. So we're going to feed the hole through, get this one seated. I believe I said rear set, but the heel guard actually mounts into the same hole as the master cylinder. Sorry, there is a lot of parts to this job, and I'm definitely misnaming a bunch of them. So we have one lined up, Now let's undo the bottom. Now we're going to slide that rear heel guard. There we go, heel guard. Now we're going to slide the heel guard over. And once again, screw back into the master cylinder. Now we're going to give these guys a good snug. Alright, there's your heel guard installed. Looks good. Now these last two bolts right here, besides the foot peg, are for your exhaust mount. So we're going to work on this right now. So for the exhaust mount, it's just going to mount right here. And there's these two 4mm screws. So I'm going to put some Loctite on these guys. And it's just going to screw in right here. Making sure to thread it by hand. I felt that one almost cross thread, so just a reminder, that's why you do it by hand first. So now your exhaust bracket is installed. We're going to have to use the stock rubber inserts from the stock Rearsets for the exhaust fitting. But now we're going to work on the brake lever itself to attach to the bottom of the master cylinder. So for the brake lever and the toe piece right here, we are going to have to take off this bolt just to apply some Loctite. So just going to unscrew it. And keep it all together. Take some Loctite on this piece right here. And just screw it back in. So we're going to keep it in the stock position just until I feel comfortable and until I know what kind of adjustments I need to make. So this guy's locked in there. Now pretty much for the swivel portion, we do need to put some grease in there. And then the 14mm bolt that we had from the other side, we're actually doing it from reverse. So let's get started by putting some all-purpose grease inside of the swivel joint right there. So we're going to take some grease right here and put it on the outside of this connector. Also pretty much inside the entire swivel portion. So the outside of the bearing is greased. Clean up that little bit of excess. And let's make sure that we also get it on this side as well. Now for assembly for this, we're basically putting this bolt through right here. So this should slide in pretty easily with the grease that we have applied. Now we're going to take this washer, put it over, and then this is going to screw in, like I said, to the rear section of the Rearset. Alright, so this part is now threaded. So before we tighten the swivel for the brake lever, we do need to line up the push actuator with the brake lever. We're going to take this swivel pin that we had from the stock set. We're going to apply a little bit of grease around here. Yep, so we're going to slide it through the front and then attach the cotter pin in the rear. So there was that washer on the cotter pin as well. So sliding the cotter pin in, fray out the edges. Now that we have the back actuator installed, we're now going to take a 14 and just tighten down the swivel bolt. Alright, that's pretty much just about as much tension as you want. As you can see, we still have smooth movement in the brake lever, and the actuator is working. All right, so same as with the left side, we're going to be putting it into the one position with the foot peg going forward using the rear hole. And for these threads, like everything else on this, you want to use some Loctite. There is a washer and a 13mm nut, which it's going to be a pretty tight fit because the brake actuator is right behind it. So I'm going to be fitting the washer pretty much right before I actually install or fully seat the bolt, or at least get some bite on that nut, which we did. So now I'm going to push this all the way in, and we're just going to tighten that nylon locking nut in the rear just enough. So we're going to be taking our 5mm Allen and our 14mm open end and just tightening this guy down. So whenever you're tightening something where it has an Allen in the front and a wrench in the back, definitely do your tightening with the wrench, not the Allen. The Allen can strip a lot easier than the bolt in the rear. So these are both good, nice and snug. So now we can install the foot peg. So for the foot peg, of course, here you got your peg and your long bolt. So we're going to apply some Loctite to this bolt right here. There you go. Now the easiest way that I found to do this is to take your 6mm and basically drop it in. Drop it into the foot peg. Line up the grooves on the top of the foot peg, and then top and bottom actually of the foot peg, and then you can tighten in that bolt. There we go, nice and snug. And then there is this little plastic cap right here. It's held on with a little O-ring, so I do put a little spit just to lubricate that O-ring, and then just pop it on. Now your foot peg is complete. So we're going to move on to getting the exhaust fitted up. So for the exhaust, basically this was the stock bracket. So just to remove this back metal piece, just slides out like that. And then we're going to push this rubber piece out. All right. Now this rubber piece basically is going to go in to this part again. So it just pops right in. And then this metal piece, just slide it in through the rear. And then now we can hook up our Graves can just like we did with the stock Rearsets. So we're using gloves just because working with titanium, you don't want any finger oils to get onto your pipe. Now the Graves can pretty much just mounts right up here. Now we're just going to put the washer in the back. So for the Graves can specifically, it is a 10mm socket up front and a 13 for the nut in the rear. So we're just going to tighten this guy down. Graves recommends 25 foot-pounds of torque. We do have Loctite on there, and it is a nylon locking nut. So we're just going to get it pretty snug. And your exhaust is mounted. Alright, so the last step for the right side is we got to bleed the brakes. So we're going to disconnect the reservoir mount so we can unscrew the cap. So it's just a, 4mm. So take that off. Now our reservoir is loose. Just going to remove the cap. So basically the inside cap should look like this. It did stretch out since we didn't unscrew the top when we bled the brakes. And I also have some extra fluid from my front master when we replaced the Rizoma reservoir. So I'm going to empty that out into here. Alright, so that's at the upper level. So we're just going to let it rest right back up here, just so it doesn't splash. Alright. And if you guys are wondering which brake fluid I use the Motul RBF 600. This is their .4 racing line. I use it in all my bikes. Definitely helps out with pressure and bite. So I highly recommend this. I'll leave a link in the description below. So we're going to crack the bleeder valve in the rear. And we're going to start pumping away to get some fluid into the system. Now remember, since we did open up the line, there's going to be a lot of air. So I can see a lot of bubbles coming into the rear out of the bleeder valve. Alright, now that reservoir needs to be topped off. Still seeing air. Getting pressure though, so now we'll top that off again. And the reason I'm not opening and closing this, like I said earlier, is because they have speed bleeders. So like I said, they have an internal check valve, so air is not going to get back into your system. So I'll leave a link in the description below for the speed bleeders. They are a must-have, especially when you bleed your brakes. It makes it such an easier process. So if you can see, I can just keep pumping. And yeah, I don't have to keep closing the bleeder valve. So right now, I'm seeing all fluid. So we're just going to go through probably one more reservoir just to make sure we don't have any air. Then we can also do a bleed later on, so. Yep. No air is in the system, so we're just going to top this guy off to the upper level as marked. Went a little too high. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to close the bleeder valve. Take off our bleeder line kit. Let that drip down just a little bit. Pop it back on there. This is a great bottle to have. Also has a magnetic magnet on the back of it, so you can attach it to different parts of your bike when you're working on it. And it's really a great product. So you can also, dump your brake fluid if you need to as well. So I'll leave a link in the description below in case you're interested in getting one of these guys. Once again, highly recommend it. So now that the system is bled, we're now going to keep the cap open and just get pressure into the system. Good pressure on the brake line. So we can also do a bleed later on down the road, since there might be some small bubbles that'll work their way back into the end. But now we can take off the reservoir and throw the cap on. Alright, so that reservoir is on there now. Nice, we got some good brake pressure for the rear. Looks good. Alright guys, so we're going to give you a finished look of the Vortex Rearset install. So, as you can see, all blacked out, definitely looks great on the bike. If you can see the Footpeg here, you do have some more aggressive knurling, and then towards the inside it is a little bit more low profile, but with the brake lever, the heel guard looks really nice, especially matched with that Graves exhaust. So the right side looks pretty good. Now let's take it on to the left. Here's the left side of the bike. Definitely a lot simpler than the right side, but looks great. Also paired up with the black Vortex chain and sprocket. So definitely happy with how these turned out. The black shifter lever. So yeah, let's take it up top and wrap it up. Alright guys, well that's going to do it for this episode of installing the Vortex Rearsets, their 2.0 version. So overall, if you couldn't tell, it was a difficult video. These were parts that I didn't have much experience with, but I learned a lot. And I hope that the install process is helpful to you, whether you purchase these ones or any other style rear set, and put them on your R1 or any other sport bike. So I'll leave a link in the description below for all the parts mentioned, including these rear sets. And other than that, if you're new to the channel, we have a lot more R1 content on the way. So definitely subscribe, drop a like. This was a difficult video to make, and also the install was not as easy as I had hoped. And other than that, leave a comment in the description below if you have any questions, or if you're in the middle of this job and you have, need some advice or anything like that. I reply to all the comments in my videos. So that's it, guys. So stay tuned, and we will see you next time. Ride safe.